Hey everyone, this is Melissa, and I'm the talkative introvert. In today's episode, I am joined by Jem Fuller. Jem has lived a colorful life. He's been a barefoot backpacker, corporate leader, fire dancer, traditionalist tattooist, and so much more. He is also a conscious communication coach and has recently published a book titled The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. You may have seen him on YouTube delivering a TED Talk on conscious communication. It's been a long day. So Jem, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Yeah, you're welcome, Melissa, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, glad to have you. And so before we get into the episode, though, I have been asking my guests, are you an introvert, extrovert, or ambivert? Somewhere in the middle.
Amber or ambivert. Yeah, when I run my profile, behavioral profiling is part of one of the tools that I use as a corporate coach. When I run my own profile, I'm almost exactly on the fence now, 50-50. So I love my time alone and with my partner. And I'm also happy to, be around people and speak up as well.
Awesome. I don't think I've met someone that's really in the middle. Usually it's like one or the other. So
yeah, I used to be more extrovert when I was younger. And then as I've got older, I've been loving my introvert more, and it's kind of flourished and it's showing up more now in my behavioral profile. But it's funny, through COVID and the restrictions here where I am in Australia, we had, I think it was reported that we had the longest, strictest lockdown restrictions over a couple of years in Melbourne and the state Victoria where I am. And it's funny, every time there was another lockdown announced, my partner and I were secretly like, yes, we can hide away. We don't have to see anyone, and we'd get some yummy wine and cheese and bickies and lock ourselves in our house and just be happy alone together.
yeah, I completely understand that because I mean, as you know, I am extremely introverted. So, a virus aside, the pandemic, like the quarantine was just amazing. It's how I started my podcast too. It's because I was stuck at home. So, without that, I don't know if I would have done the podcast.
Yeah. And that's me too. I wrote my book in the lockdowns as well, because, we had this extra time but it's interesting. I kind of did some self-imposed, when I was younger in my late 20s, I did some self-imposed long stretches of introversion. So traveling on my own for years in foreign countries and really learning how to be super comfortable with me, just with myself. And it was a beautiful time, actually, and it was developing a relationship with self, which I still to this day believe is the most important relationship to nourish and foster. And if you are, if you're constantly surrounded by other people and noise and movement and things and, the kind of the vibrancy of a city or whatever it is, then you can successfully avoid going where I think you need to go in a beautiful introverted way to nourish that relationship with self, So, yeah, I got to do that traveling many years ago. And then just now, naturally, the older I've got and being a father, we've got 4 teenagers and, life's busy because you're driving these kids around to all their sporting events and school and whatnot. And also the work that I do is with people. So that's pretty busy. So if I'm not parenting or working, I want to be just super quiet.
Yeah. I read an article somewhere that the older you get, you actually become more introverted.
Yeah.
Especially once you've established your home life, you have a partner, kids, like the basic route, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
It is more common to be more introverted. So it makes sense.
Yeah. And, that's been my experience of it for sure. It's also interesting, I'm fascinated in human behavior, and we can generalize with some macro behavioral patterns And so this is a generalization, and obviously there's always exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, our more introverted behavioral styles are also more inclined towards detail. They're more inclined towards process. They're more inclined towards considered decision making. These other traits come through. They're past assurance based, so they'll look at the track record of something before making a decision based on it. Whereas extroversion is generally aligned with, big picture, fast thinking, taking action, making decisions really quickly, kind of sped up and looking to the future, not really caring about the track record of anything. So yeah, it's interesting. It's just interesting to bring those characteristics into the conversation as well, because obviously we need to be able to do detail as well as big picture, ideally. It's good to be able to reflect on the past, not just focus on the future. So there are traits that come along with introversion and extroversion that are really helpful to understand as well.
Yeah, I was talking to someone who is on the opposite spectrum of me as an extrovert, and he was saying how that he thinks that both are having an introvert and extrovert talk to each other is actually a really great conversation, which I agree. I had a really great talk with him. And because sometimes when you have two introverts in a room, sometimes it gets a little too quiet, or like we are so used to being in that listener role we forget to talk sometimes.
Yeah.
So it was a very interesting chat with him, and I thought it was a good back and forth.
Yeah, it's funny, I mean, I know lots of introverts who are great conversationalists when it's one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
And if the topic of the conversation is something that interests them, they're happy to talk. It's not like introverts are not happy to talk. It's just that generally speaking, the introverted part of us doesn't really have the drive or the push to try and be heard over others who are already kind of taking up that space. It's just easier to sit back and listen. Whereas an extrovert will be queuing up to get in there and have their say, Yeah, I have great conversations with introverts.
Yeah, you make a good point where if it is something that we like to talk about, or like a subject that we're very interested in, then we have a lot to say, because sometimes in our off time, like when we're not talking to someone and it's an interesting subject and something we know a lot about, we do think about it a lot. So we have all these reserved opinions and facts in our head. And once the moment comes where someone actually wants to talk about it, then it's exciting, it's energizing.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because you feel like you've got something worth sharing on the matter because you've spent time thinking about it. Quite often because I work with leaders and teams, quite often in a team dynamic, the more introverted members of the team who don't say much very often, when they do have something to say, it's gold. If they've taken the effort and the energy to actually share something, quite often it's a room stopper and everyone goes, "Oh my God, that's awesome." Whereas extroverts can talk a lot and maybe, I don't know, 5% of what they say is gold and the rest of it's just kind of them going,
Yeah, I was taking a training on project management, and we talked about the different like communication styles. And one of the things that introverts tend to do is that they think out loud. So they'll start from point A, and then when they reach to point B, like there's all of these thinking out loud, on the way to point B. And
Uh-huh.
so they may say the opposite of what they just said earlier, but that's because they're
Right.
still thinking it through.
Uh-huh.
So you're like, so what an introvert would be saying in their head, extroverts are saying it out loud to you. So
Yeah.
that's why it's
Yeah.
kind of hard to follow sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Bless them all. We need all the different versions, don't we?
Oh yeah.
It's what makes us whole as a species. Imagine if we were all, the same behaviorally, that wouldn't work.
Yeah, I agree. But anyways, to go back to topics that are energizing and things that make me excited to talk about. So
Yeah.
when we talked previously, so we met before this episode, and we talked about the practice of open-mindedness. So if you remember from our previous chat, we talked about how we don't typically practice open-mindedness as much as we think we do, because
Mm.
everyone claims that they're open-minded, right? But then in places like America, for example, we're extremely divided on almost everything. It could
Yeah.
be even just the flavor of ice cream. Like people are just completely divided. And
Yeah.
so the practice of being open-minded, it's something that we say we are, but it's not truly what we are sometimes
Yeah.
for some
Yeah,
people.
completely. And that's human nature. It's human nature to be closed-minded.
Yeah.
It's a survival mechanism. We have this illusory sense of identity. This idea of me, that I'm this entity, and I'm separate from the environment around me, which is an illusion. And this idea of self, the ego that we've created, is an illusion as well. That's okay. It's necessary. It's a part of being human, but it's a survival mechanism. And we latch onto anything that we can, anything tangible, as a sense of who we think we are, our sense of identity. So that includes our ideological beliefs, our political beliefs, the way we think things should be. We grab on very tightly to that as our sense of identity. So people will say, I'm a pro-vaxxer, or I'm an anti-vaxxer, as in that's who they are as a person, or I'm pro-life, or I'm pro-choice. So they've identified with this idea, and we defend our sense of identity vehemently, passionately, because for the ego, if your sense of identity is attacked or challenged to the ego, that's real life and death. So it fights like it's life and death. So we are actually very closed-minded. We have these ideas of reality, and we cling onto them very tightly for survival. And even though we might think we're open-minded, like you said, think of it like this, right? If you're scrolling through social media and you see some news, as soon as you read that news article, you have an opinion on that immediately. I mean, your judgment is immediate. And every piece of information that we receive from the outside world, we take personally. We can't not take it personally, because we can only receive that information through our filtering system, which is our own personal understanding of who we are and how we fit within the world the way the world is. So we take everything personally and we judge it immediately. We might say that we're being discerning, but usually we're just being judgmental. And we have our reflex opinion straight away, which is closed-minded. And then we have things like confirmation bias, where if you have a belief around something and then there's data that shows contrary to your belief, so the data undoes your belief, we actually kind of do a little bit of a mental stumble for a second, and then we double down on our original belief in spite of the contrary data. It's fascinating, us humans. So yes, we are by nature very closed-minded, but I believe that we can practice and develop the ability to pause and engage a sense of curiosity to a point of view that's very different to ours. I believe it's possible for someone who is pro-choice to sit with someone who is pro-life and put their own ideas to the side for a second and really lean in and seek to understand why this other person has the beliefs that they have. What's really at the bottom of it? Where is it actually coming from? And it's coming, and when we open our minds and dig a little bit deeper, we might actually get to the point where we realize that we're both coming from a place of love, although our ideas around how that manifests are different. But essentially, we're wanting what we think is good for humans. It doesn't mean that we always are going to agree. That's not the point. The point is that our discourse, our communication can be more open-minded and more curious and more gentle and more loving, rather than this shouting at each other and trying to vilify each other and cancel each other on Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so important to practice open-mindedness, because it is a practice. Doesn't come naturally, like you said. And in this world that we live in, it's important more than ever. And on like what you were saying about the pro-life or pro-choice, both people they don't necessarily, they're not necessarily evil. You know, one side isn't
No.
worse than the other, and they do come from a place of love, because I do know people from both sides. And so it does
Yeah.
hurt me a lot when people are like Democrat this, or liberal this, and conservative this, and it's like,
Yeah.
it politics, it really is a belief system, you know, like
Hmm.
you, a person, like it's so easy to not be friends with someone because of where their political stance is, or, you know, their political belief, like if they're conservative, whatever.
Mm.
But you don't typically hear someone say like, well, I'm not friends with that person because that person's, you know, Muslim or Jewish, or,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and that again is
Crazy.
a belief. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah, I agree. And brand new babies, like a brand new little baby, is not liberal or Democrat or even Muslim or Christian or Jew. A brand new little baby is just a brand new little baby. Now, if that baby was born in a different town under a different culture and a different upbringing, it would end up having different beliefs around things. You know, there's this mix of nurture and nature, and the research is showing, recent studies are showing that the blend of nurture and nature, so what you're genetically born with and your predisposed behavioral tendencies, and then the environment and how you're brought up, they reckon it's about 50-50, you know.
okay.
So yeah, it's crazy. I had a friend through COVID who has been disowned from her family because she was anti-vax. Now, she doesn't even identify as an anti-vaxxer. That's not her sense of identity. She's a nurse, and the research that she did and the information that came to her, and for whatever reason, it doesn't matter. Her choice was to not be vaccinated,
Mm-hmm.
and it cost her her job and other things. But her family have disowned her. You are no longer our daughter. And that's
So
crazy,
sad.
just because of a different idea. You know, I think it's ridiculous. Some of my closest friends have very, very different ideas on reality to me, you know, but we find beautiful ways to connect. One of my dearest friends, I actually consider him my brother, is a Hindu in the Himalayan mountains, and we've been very close for 25 years. And he is in line to be the priest of the Krishna temple. Now, he is a devout Krishna Hindu, and well, I don't even call myself an atheist. I'm very spiritual, but I don't have a religion that I follow. I was brought up in a Christian family, so my understanding of practice and faith and worship was Christian, but I don't practice any religion right now, and I don't intend on for the rest of my life. But he and I adore each other. We love each other. We're as close as you could be, you know, but I don't believe in Krishna.
Yeah. It's crazy that, you know, people have gone to that point where they're just disowning each other just because of, you know, a single choice, you know, and when people do that, it it just, it closes doors to meeting some really like amazing people, you know, because people are just too scared now. They're too scared to share their beliefs or their opinions, and if their belief or opinion doesn't match, you know, what's on social media or what's on the news or whatever, but they could potentially be shunned. And it's really sad, because I think everyone's voices should be heard, you know, and it should be up to the other person if they want to believe them or not. But I don't think we should shut people out.
No, no, definitely not. You know, I mean, I believe that it's through harnessing the power of diversity, you know, and diversity, all sorts of diversity, cultural and you know, demographic diversity, and any kind of difference we should be celebrating and finding ways to communicate across these divides of difference, because it's through a wider bandwidth of input that we're going to come up with better solutions to these big problems. You know, if we're only hanging out with people who think exactly like us, that's a very narrow bandwidth for solving problems. You know, and it's also ridiculous because there's a big wide world with lots of different people in it.
Yeah.
And to believe that the whole world should just be like you, and we should get rid of. I mean, that's just craziness, you know. So, and look, it's sad. It is sad. I agree. It's sad because there are certainly, you know, there's some political divisiveness at the moment, which is geared towards creating these divides and harnessing the fear, the natural fear that humans have, and using it to political ends, which is, it's just so sad. I really believe we have what it takes to evolve beyond this, you know, kind of antiquated, unnecessary, dysfunctional behavior. That's what's going on. I don't think it's necessary anymore. I mean, maybe 1,000 years ago it was necessary, or maybe even a few hundred years ago it was necessary. But seriously, we've got the technology and the understanding, and we're moving into a spiritual sensibility that we really do have what it takes to work together more functionally, more effectively. So it's frustrating. But, you know, there's people like you and me who are having conversations like this to hopefully encourage people to think more like this and to kind of show up more like this in their day-to-day lives. And who knows, maybe it will come good.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that, you know, people take a step back and realize how much worse it is to be this way. And I did want to ask you though, so for me, I feel like it's gotten worse, especially with the internet and social media and just everything's being so easily accessible. Cause I'm thinking back when I was a kid, and so I have a sister she just started high school, or sister-in-law that just started high school, and she's only, I think, 14 or right now. But even before high school, like even like last year and the last previous years, kids her age talk about like the politics, and they talk about how awful like conservatives are, how awful liberals are. Like they're actually having these conversations like this person's evil and this person blah blah blah. And I remember when I was a kid, like we were watching like SpongeBob, or like we were watching, you know,
Yeah.
cartoons, or like talking about Disney, or talking about like, I don't remember ever talking about the same way that kids are now. And so do you think that this division and, you know, this closed-mindedness, it has become worse, or is it just more, or do we just see it more because of social media and the, you know, the internet?
Mm. It's such a great question. You know, I mean, we're running this social experiment on ourselves with social media, and we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, but we're certainly affecting ourselves with these smart, when I say smart devices, using inverted commas, we're certainly affecting ourselves in ways that we're starting to see some of the impacts on it, of that technology on us as a species, but really the impacts that will come in the next 20 to 30 years, we just don't know. But yeah, absolutely, our kids are exposed to an infinite amount of more stuff than we were when we were kids.
Because
You
you have
know,
teenagers, right? That's what you said
yeah, I've got
earlier.
an 18-year-old, 16-year-old, and my partner has a 15 and 13-year-old. So there's 4 teenagers there, and yeah, they're exposed to stuff, and they have access to stuff that we didn't even know about. You know, I mean, it's funny. My 18-year-old, he's in his final year of high school. I don't know if you call it high school in the States.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he's in his final year of high school, and he's going to take a year off next year before going to university. He wants to travel around the world.
Oh, nice.
And he said, yeah, it's great. And he said to me, Dad, what do I do? Like when I get to a foreign city in a foreign country, how will I know where to go or what to do? And I said, oh my God, are you crazy? You've got an iPhone, dude. Everything you need is on there. Like you can book your hotels, your transport, your cars. You can find out where it's good to eat. You can find out what to go and see. You can meet people. You can couch surf. You can meet groups of people that are also into Lego. You know, he's still into Lego. I said, dude, it's so easy for you. When I was traveling around the world when I was 18, I had this big, heavy book called A Lonely Planet Guidebook, you know, which I didn't even ever use really, only on emergencies. It sat in the bottom of my backpack. But we just figured it out. We had no idea what we were doing. We just walk around and ask people where to go and that kind of thing. So, yeah, look, it's a different world. And back to your point, you know, 13-year-olds scrolling through YouTube or Snapchat or whatever they're scrolling through, and being exposed to conversations about how the right hates the left and the left hates the right, and these people are evil and these people are good, or the identity politics and the pronouns and that whole thing. And the kids are worried about upsetting someone by seeing someone who, to them, they see a male their age, and they're scared to say, oh, he's coming over to my place, because they don't want to say he in case they get it wrong, and then they get vilified and da da da. I mean, it's a crazy world. It's really just become a little bit kind of crazy. So look, I don't know, Melissa. I don't know what's going to happen. I think really for me as a parent, I just focus on what I can have some influence over, which is, in my relationship and my communication with my kids, how I can hopefully positively influence them in ways. And, my kids are open-minded. They don't have prejudice towards people based on color of skin or religion or race or anything like that. They've just been brought up that people are people, and that they're lucky. My kids are very lucky, and privileged is another word that we have to use, but they are, and they've been travel. I've taken them to Asia. They've been through Southeast Asia, and they've been through Indonesia, and so they've seen how other people live, and they know there's a big wide world out there beyond YouTube and Instagram. But yeah, I don't know. It's changing in ways, isn't it? It's a little bit concerning. The kids are only one touch away from horrible things on the internet as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy how everything is so easily accessible, and in a way, it's made a lot of people's lives easier, for sure. But it's also made people's lives a little too easy sometimes. Like when you're talking about how's he going to get around and all that. And even just in a more recent times with the creation of Google Maps, when I first started driving, that didn't exist, but I was able to get everywhere. I always made it home in time. But now sometimes I have to put up Google Maps just to get home. I'm just like, I didn't have to do this when I was 16. Like, why am I doing this now? And so it's just very, very convenient. And, but that kind of, sometimes I wonder if that, life being a little too easy also kind of impacts our kids, or no, I don't have kids, but the kids of the next generation, because
I like that you say our kids. I like that, because they are our kids. They are our next generation. And I agree. I think it is having an impact. I think there's a certain amount of entitlement that I wasn't aware of when I was their age. Our kids are coming out of school and getting a job, and they want to be paid top dollar straight away, and they want to have all the perks straight away, and they want everything easily, because it's all been so easy for them to get. I mean, they can ask their smart device anything they want, and they know the answer straight away. We didn't have that, back in the days of going and looking through an encyclopedia to try and learn something. And so, yeah, look, I think there's a certain amount of entitlement, and the old idea of, you need to work hard and earn your stripes, so to speak, is being challenged at the moment. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, because sometimes I hear kids and hear, not even kids sometimes people my age, like millennials and who are adults now. I don't know why that's crazy to me. I still feel like a child, but but even sometimes millennials are, they're talking about how horrible America is, and we're going down the drain, and how we're awful. And it just brings me back to when my parents brought me to the Philippines, my brother and I, to the Philippines, and we got to see the squatter area. So that's what they call it, the squatter areas. And, these people's houses are built out of just whatever they could find. And it's just like, there's no electricity, no air conditioner, you still have to do the water pump and all this stuff. And I think it's evolved since then, but it's still nowhere near, the poor parts of here in America. like at least the poor parts of like here in America, they still have, you know, housing and the places for people to live. Like we have homeless shelters and we have like all these different amenities that, you know, other countries don't have. And sometimes I'm just like, man, you guys really need to visit the squatter areas or visit these other, you know, poor country or like, you know, third world countries and really see how it is. And, you know, maybe you'll actually be grateful for this country and that instead of tearing it down, we can build it up, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? You know, people who haven't left, it's the same in Australia. People who haven't left Australia, not all of them, some of them, just some people can easily take for granted what we have here, you know, and complain about Australia, complain about this, that, and the other. And it's like, wow, you really have got no idea. Our healthcare is free. You know, you're sick, you go to the hospital, it's free. You know, and the roads are in good conditions, and yeah. And so, look, I know a lot of people who haven't traveled either, and I've spent years living in India and Southeast Asia and other parts like this, and it's really important, I think, to have this perspective, you know, and to see how good we've got it. And I bet at the same time, there's, you know, I was watching a documentary from the States the other day about the towns, you know, the homeless people and where they're living in their shanty towns. That's what they're called in India, but I don't know what you call them, slums or whatever. But, you know, that's a real problem as well in the States. And you know, every country has its problems. And I really only know I don't consume mainstream news because I choose not to. I haven't watched mainstream news for over 20 years.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's just I
It's
don't
too
agree with the
depressing.
whole. Yeah, it's depressing, and it's an institution I just don't agree with. It's just making money off feeding us all of the horrible, horrible news. Anyway, so I really only know what I know through listening to good quality podcasts and watching documentaries, and then speaking with people like you know, and you know, from all the way over here in Australia, my exposure to people in the States is that there's so many good people trying to do good work. They're just fighting against a massive political system, which is kind of imploding upon itself, you know. But there's, in terms of the average person, they're good people. Humans are
Mhm.
good, you know. And there's a lot of research. This is not just me as some old kind of hippie going, humans are lovely, man. There's actually a bunch of research that shows that humans' nature is actually good, not horrible. You know, the Lord of the Flies book, that famous book about how the kids all start, you know, becoming violent on the island together, it's just not true.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, look, I think we're good. I don't know whether we'll get it together in time, or whether the climate will change too much, or whether another pandemic will come that's more deadly than the last one, or who knows. You know, I'm not really sure, but I do know that there's good people trying to do good work.
Yeah, I think so too. I think I think majority of people, even though you know the news tries to tell us how evil one side is, you know, but I think in general everyone has good intentions, and people make the choices they make because they want what's best for their family and their friends, and that's why I don't really pick a side, and I try not to like vilify the one or demonize one or the other because they're coming from a good place. You know, they just want what's best for everybody. And, you know, what's best for everybody, no one truly knows what that is. So that's why, you know, like no, not one political party is better than the other because no one knows. At the end of the day, no one knows.
Yeah, that's right. We're just trying on a whole bunch of different ideas, and you know, there's plenty of bad ideas.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there's a guy who I listen to. I listen to his podcast, and I use his meditation app. His name's Sam Harris, um, and I love this quote of his. He says, "It's not that there are bad people; they're good people. They've just been sold on bad ideas." You
Oh.
know,
Mhm.
and I love this because this is a place. This for me is my place of compassion, and my ability to have compassion, even for someone who has been so sold on a bad idea that they do a terrible thing, like a suicide bomber,
Mhm.
right? A religious suicide bomber. They've been sold on this idea that if they go and do that, that they go straight to heaven, and that they get to live in the heavenly afterlife and that they're doing a good thing, that's a really bad idea, right? But they believe that bad idea. But that doesn't mean they're a bad person. They just happen to be born where they were born and brought up in the environment that they were brought up in. It's like saying the child soldier in Sierra Leone, whose family were raped and murdered in front of them. And then they got given a automatic weapon at the age of 10 years old and told that, to channel their anger into killing, right? They weren't born a bad person. They were just born in the wrong spot. If that kid was born in my hometown, he'd be surfing and smoking weed and chilling out with his mates. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I really don't think that people are necessarily born bad. Now, there are psychopaths, and that's a medical condition, and the wiring is not right. So that's a different story. I'm just talking about people generally.
Yeah.
Generally, people think they're doing the right thing. I think it's beautiful, Melissa, that you don't vilify or put someone in the evil category just because of where they're coming from.
Yeah. And thank you. First of all, thank you. But yeah, and sometimes I also think it's a product of bad leadership too. Like people who go into war, they're doing it because they're trying to protect their country. So in my opinion, not, one side isn't necessarily bad. It's just they're doing what they need to do to protect themselves and protect their country. And a lot of times these, people in the military are just following what they are being told, and they're just following the leader, and the leader may be corrupt, may be good, maybe have good intentions, but they're just following them and following orders, and
and they're doing what they think is the right thing to do.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a bug.
Yeah, all good. This is just my personal opinion, and it's not right or wrong. It's just my personal opinion, but I just think that war is, it should be redundant. We should have left it in the past. It doesn't solve any problems. It doesn't even solve the problem of if you think it's right for your country or, Putin doing what he's doing. It's not actually going to advance his cause. It's really not. In the end, it's only a lose-lose situation. It's so sad that, that whole Ukraine thing's happening because it's so backwards. It's so unevolved. But apparently that's where some humans still are. So we have to breathe, take a breath, and just keep kind of, doing what we can do. But, I think violence is just an old patriarchal thing, which is still part of most of our societies are still patriarchal in their structures, and the patriarchy, it's not about men and women. The patriarchal structure is about dominance and, and teaching our young boys that to be a man, they have to dominate their friends, they have to dominate their partners, they have to win, and it's old and tired. And I think we should be doing what we can to undo that.
Yeah, I 100% agree because it's also my opinion that, the thing between Russia and Ukraine really is just a product of the higher powers not agreeing, and then their citizens are the ones that are taking the impact from their disagreement, their arguments. And it's really not fair because they're no matter what they do or say to each other, they're protected, and it's the citizens who, have to take the fall for them.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's the citizens who bear the brunt of it, while the leaders are sitting back there in their white palace doing whatever they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's crazy. Hey, what do you think about? I'm just curious about your thoughts on introverts again. Because introverts obviously have a lot to offer in terms of leadership, but do you think they're less likely to come into leadership positions, and is that a problem?
Whether they're less likely, I'm not sure. I know that there have, like the average introvert doesn't necessarily like being center of attention, but whether it's less likely for them to be in a more managerial position, I'm not sure. I don't think so. Um, I think they're very capable of being in that position, and I think that they do make great leaders. I think introverts do have they tend to, not saying extroverts don't, but like they tend to have better, like deeper connections and relationships with their people. So they're able to have that, like, like for example, I work in IT, and we have our client vendor relationship. And I do believe like my relationships with the vendor is really good because of having that deep connection, and being able to step back and think about, okay, like why is it rusty right now, like what do we need to work on, and then being able to talk to them about it. There's that, our ability to take it back and have this analysis on a relationship and then to build on it. Whereas, as we talked about earlier, like extroverts tend to think out loud. And so when you're heated in the moment, sometimes, it may not be the appropriate time to be talking about it, but because they tend to talk out loud, they may have, spark the conversation, and it may not be the right time. And when they really should have just stepped, parking lot an item, and then really take a step back to really analyze the situation and why it became heated in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I think introverts and extroverts both have different and equally beneficial things to offer leadership, for sure. And people who have dedicated lots of time and resource to study introverts, like Brene Brown. Brene Brown's an introvert, but she has been forced into an extrovert position because her work is so useful,
like
and and inspiring. So there's an introvert that has to, to follow the mission of her work. She needs to put herself in the uncomfortable position that an extrovert would be more comfortable in. I'm just wondering that, to be the president of the United States, or the prime minister of Australia, or, to be the leader of a political party, to get there, do you have to have been more extrovert and speaking out loud and talking over the top of others and making your point, laboring your point more assertively than others or something? I don't know.
Well, so I don't know how it's there in Australia, but if the government is done right, which in my opinion isn't really done right here, like there's definitely a lot of corruption and people, taking advantage of things. And in America, the president isn't supposed to be this ultimate leader. He's supposed, or he, I just say he, but he or she or they really should be just 1/3 of the power. And so as a president, you're kind of more of like the spokesperson. So you don't really need to be an introvert. I think an extrovert does a great job in that area because they don't mind, the public speaking and being the spokesperson and being like the image for America. But when it comes down to like the analysis and the research and like, and, making the decision making and all that stuff, that really, an introvert can do that from the background.
Maybe you could say, maybe the saying could be behind every successful extrovert is a great introvert.
Yeah, there you go.
Doing all the research and making the decisions, and then telling them, hey, this is what you should really do. And then the extrovert stands up and goes, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, because the president really is just, they're just doing conferences and they're talking to the people and they're like sharing the message and they're, sharing what the Supreme Court is saying and what legislative and whatever. And
I think I'm going to quote that. I'm going to quote that on social media, and I'm going to tag you in it. Behind every great extrovert is an awesome introvert.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, definitely do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think I think it could go either way, introvert, extrovert, but I think an extrovert just would really do a good job as the president, just because at least how it's supposed to be set up, they really are the spokesperson, like the front man, if you will, or front woman. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The front human, woman.
The front human. There you go.
The front thing. The front thing. Yeah. That person. standing up, doing all the talking. Yeah. So look, this kind of circles all the way back to near the start of our conversation, how we need both. We need extrovert and introvert, and we can play to our strengths, and we should play to our strengths. I
Yeah.
talk about this with leaders and teams as well. People thrive in their work when they feel that they get to play to their natural talents and their strengths reasonably regularly. So if you've got someone who loves detail and loves to sit there quietly, diving deep into the intricacies of what's going on, if they love that, get them doing that. And if you've got someone else who doesn't, they sit there going, oh my God, I'm going crazy, get me out of this office. Get them out in a role where they're talking and meeting and relationship building or whatever it is, Yeah. Yeah, playing to our strengths. There's a guy in the UK called Marcus Buckingham, who's a leadership speaker as well, and he has some great YouTube clips on us as humans playing to our strengths, and how if someone's naturally introvert, get them in a role. And we kind of tend to end up like that as well. I've run thousands of behavioral profiles for people in the commercial world, and not just in the private sector, in not-for-profit, in government, etc. But, when I'm working, if I go and do a piece of work with a bank and I'm working with the team of risk assessors, they're all introverts, right? They all have an eye for detail. They're all happy to sit there and, do the analysis on a person to see whether the risk profile. None of them are really extroverts. But if I go and speak to the sales team who are out there on the road in their car going up and, selling and meeting people and building relationships, they're pretty much all extroverts. So we kind of find our way into our paths because of who we are by nature anyway,
Yeah, I think we definitely need each other. We feed off each other. Like, I think our director, for example, I think she's a little more extroverted because she does like people and she likes talking to people. And we kind of need that because, that's why you have your analysts, because they do all the research. Like our team, for example, puts together like the stats reports and all that stuff. And then it's really just packaging it up for her so she can share it with, upper management. And that works because I don't want to talk to upper management. I'd rather do the research and put it together. So it works out that way.
Yeah. We need each other. It's the only reason that the human race as a species has been able to evolve and survive has been through our ability to connect, communicate, and socialize. We 100% need each other. Even just something simple, you think about a building, a simple building like a house, it's very unlikely that there's one person that could conceive of the house, have the idea of it, and then do the architecture drawings and then do the engineering drawings and then turn up and lay the bricks and do the windows and the plumbing and the electricity and the everything, and then maybe there are some handy people who can build their own house, but they don't know how to design, Wi-Fi and bring in Wi-Fi and tech and da, da, da. So we need each other. I think that's, part of the reason that we're deeply driven to connect. We have a deep drive for connection that's at our very core, simply because we're a social creature and we need each other. And that's interesting too, because through the lockdowns, and I'm sure you experienced the same thing, through the restrictions and the isolation, depression and anxiety rates went through the roof because people were isolated and they couldn't connect. And that was even harder for extroverts. So of my two teenage boys, my older boy is beautifully introvert, and my younger boy is massively extrovert. In the lockdowns, my introvert son, he loved it. Yeah, he was happy with that. My younger boy suffered depression and anxiety, was having anxiety attacks and really struggling. And it was just simply because he was removed from his social group. So yeah, it's interesting. We need each other, and we're driven to connect. And I think that's that's a good thing. And that's another reason why it's sad to watch people battling each other and creating enemies over different political or ideological beliefs. It's just such a shame because we actually need each other, and the connection it's not just a nice kind of spiritual kumbaya, we should all love each other because that's nice, which it is at the same time, but it's
Yeah.
also very functional. You know,
Yeah.
it's functional that we should connect and get along.
Yeah. I mean, that really goes back to what we were talking about, practicing open mindedness, because, like you said, we do need each other. And sometimes we need that person to challenge us. We're so stuck in our ways, so stuck in our belief systems, and we need the opposite side to challenge us, challenge our way of thinking, because maybe we're wrong or maybe they're wrong, and we need to have that dialogue. So if we can't practice open-mindedness, that dialogue is cut off, and people are no longer challenging each other, and people aren't questioning whether their beliefs are right or not. And yeah, again, like it's important to have that open-mindedness. And I think we're becoming more close-minded, like, as the years go by. At least that's what I've noticed.
Yeah. And at the very fundamental level, we've got way more in common than we think. I will always remember this young man in the mountains of Pakistan on a public bus. I was there in the late 90s. And actually, I was in Pakistan in 1998 when the American government sent cruise missiles into Pakistan to try and kill Osama bin Laden. This is in 98, a few years before 9/11. And they tried to kill Osama bin Laden back then because of an embassy bombing in Africa. There was an American embassy that was bombed. And I was on a bus and I was chatting with this university student. And he said to me something that has stuck with me forever. He said, "You and I, we have a lot more in common than you think. I'm a devout Muslim and you're an atheist." But he said, "If I cut your skin here and we cut my skin here, we have the same colored blood." That was his analogy to me. And that metaphor meant so much more than just the fact that we have the same colored blood. It's deeper than skin. And what that meant for me and what stuck with me is that at that fundamental level, you and I, Melissa, we both need food and shelter. We both feel the pain of loss when a loved one dies. We both need comfort. We both need water. We both need oxygen. We both have a beating heart. We both experience emotions, the same emotions. We are actually the same. And we are connected on these fundamental levels. And so when people can peel back the layers of difference and really come down to the core of it, it's like, oh, wow, you and I, we are connected. We really are. I get you. I get you. And if we can remember to do that, if we can be open-minded enough to have a conversation and come down to the fundamental level of connection and go, wow, you're coming from a place of love as well. And then we can start to explore our differences and broaden our respective horizons. I hope that I learned something through conversation with you. I hope that I learned to see the world in a slightly different way that I didn't see before.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if people were more willing to step out of themselves for a little bit, like that saying, like, being in someone's shoes. I think that's so important that people forget. Like, you need to be in someone's shoes to understand why they think the way they do. Like, I think it's very harmful to just automatically think the worst of the other person without understanding why they think that way. Like, taking the pro-life and pro-choice example, people who are pro-choice think that they're baby killers. Like, pro-life people are baby killers and they don't care about the opposite. I always get them confused. Like, one side's are baby killers, but the other side doesn't care about the woman's body or something like that. But in reality, like, they care about both. It's just, you just have to determine, when does life begin? It's always the big question. And so that's where people differ. And it's not that one doesn't care less than the other. It's just what they believe when life begins.
Yeah. 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 And people not pausing to consider, so the people who are pro-life and saying that abortion 100% from the moment of conception, that abortion should not be allowed, Have they really sat down with a 10-year-old girl who got raped and was forced to have the child from someone who raped her when she was 10? Now, have you sat with that girl and really tried to understand from in her shoes, what that's like, and then what the life of that child might be like because of the situation that they were born into? Now this can be flipped. It can be the other way around. Can the person who is pro-choice have actually sat down with someone who's pro-life and asked them, and with an open mind, not with a judgmental closed mind, with an open mind, and go, I really want to try and understand where you're coming from. What's driving your political or ideological belief here? And to try and see that they're coming from a place of love for humanity and not wanting to kill.
Yeah, exactly.
And so let's understand where we're coming from. And then once we understand that we're both coming from a place of love for humanity, then can we start to have a good conversation about stuff that's hard to figure out, like when does the egg and the sperm, when they come together in the moment of conception, when is their consciousness? When are those cells actually conscious? When can they experience suffering?
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a look at that medically, because as we watch cells, because cells themselves, just the cell itself, can't experience suffering because it doesn't have any sensory
Right.
stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then as those cells multiply, and then at some point in the gestation, there comes a point in time when the sensory system starts to switch on. So when there can actually be a sense of suffering. So if we're calm enough and analytical enough and together enough, we can explore this together. Let's explore this. You don't need to just get all on your high horse and start shouting at each other and saying, you're evil. And, that's just not going to help anything.
Yeah. Sometimes people let their emotions take over, and we need to remember to take a breather and step back and realize, am I saying this because this is what I truly believe in and this is what I want to share? Or am I saying this because I'm overly emotional and I just want this person to listen to me and to change their mind, and without even truly actively listening?
Yeah. And look, I think it's important for people to have an agenda. I think it's important for people to have a belief or to have an idea that they believe in and they want to fight for.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't think they need to fight as in literally fight for it, because that's just not going to help.
Yeah.
And you can march. I think that, if there are people that feel to march and wave placards, do it 100%. But in the conversations to try and evolve the situation, there's more conscious ways of having communication. There's more conscious ways of us coming together to work through problems and try and really figure out what's best for humanity. Violence and shouting at each other, and even if it's, social media violence, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Doesn't work.
It's just, it just becomes viral. Everyone's just watching it.
Yeah, I know, because the algorithms are just trying to get our attention, and people click on that stuff. You should see my social media feed, Melissa. It's all positive news. It's all good stuff that's going on. The terrible stuff doesn't show up in my feed because the algorithms know I don't click on it.
Oh, good.
Hey, how's this? This is a true story, right?
Okay.
I was coaching this guy a few years ago, and he lives in the city. I'm in a small town, and he lives in the city near me. It's a pretty small city. And he said to me, Jem, have you noticed that it's going crazy in the city? Like, there's so much violence, I'm just seeing it. And there's people are pulling up in traffic lights in the peak hour traffic, and they're getting out and fighting each other. And he said the other night, this ice addict came to my house and was banging like a lunatic on my front door, saying that we'd stolen her house and I had to do a citizen's arrest. And he goes, I'm just seeing it everywhere. And I said, that's interesting, man, because I don't see it at all, right? It's not showing up in my reality, in my real life feed. It's not showing up. And I said, hey, I'm really curious, man. Can you show me your social media feeds? And so he opened Facebook or whatever, and we scrolled through his feed, And it was all of that sensational stuff,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
cops beating people and people fighting and, you know, craziness and all of this kind of stuff. I said, look at your social media feed. I said, that's not everybody's social media feed. That's yours. It's probably most people's, because most people click on that stuff. But I said, look at my feed. And I showed him my feed. And I said, right, let's run an experiment. For the next month, I think, or we did 2 months. For the next 2 months, just click on positive stuff. Click on humans being nice to each other. Click on humans finding ways to solve problems. Click on positive news. Just click on that stuff and see what happens. So he clicked on it in his social media feed. Not only did his social media feed change, but in his real life feed started to change. He started to come across less violence out on the streets. How crazy is that? You know, now there's some quantum physical thing going on there that I can't quite explain, but my experience of what you focus on is what shows up more, right? Because we have a filtering system and we block out a whole bunch of stuff, and we block out stuff and we delete stuff to match our belief system. If you believe life is tough and full of terrible people, guess what shows up in your life? If you believe that I have a belief that people are generally lovely, you know, and I just meet lovely people. I don't meet assholes. You know, I block them out somehow, or I distort the information. So I might have come across an asshole, you know, at the supermarket, but I distort the information to see a nice person. So my experience of them was that they were nice, right? This is what's going on with us as humans, but the cool part is that we can actually we can reverse engineer it. We can consciously get in there and choose what we focus on, and that shows up more.
Yeah, I believe that because I have two examples. So one, I don't know why my friend made this comment, but um we were watching a movie and there's like a part of the movie where the cop is standing catching people speeding and then going chasing after them. I was like, how fun would that be to be like in a cop car chasing someone to, you know, someone speeding and giving them a ticket, you know? And then she said something like, yeah, until you get shot by a cop. And I was like, whoa, okay.
Wow.
And uh,
Yeah.
and so like I'm not trying to you know, diminish police brutality because that is a real thing, but I don't think people realize that if you actually look at the data, you know, that, you know, being shot by a cop during being pulled over, or like just gun violence overall in America, those things actually are very, very tiny. You know, like majority of our gun violence is homicides, you know, suicide, gang violence. And I think cop ones, if I remember correctly, my data is probably outdated, but I think it's like less than 3% or 5% or something like that. So it's not as much as people think, but because they're conditioned to think that way, especially with BLM and all this stuff. And again, not saying it's not true because, you know, police brutality is very, very real. We have this distortion that it happens all the time and that it's happening to everybody that gets pulled over when that's not really fact. And then like my other example is my mom got a ring. So I'm sure you know what a ring is, right?
Yep.
So, so with the ring, which I didn't know this until she got one, but I guess there's an app that you can download, you know, well, you kind of need to download it to use the ring, but it also gives you news of the nearby neighborhoods. And so she's getting constant notification, like someone tried to break in, or, you know, like they saw someone steal a package on their ring video, or like, and it's constant because one time I have to remember next time I see her to turn it off. Cause, last time I saw her like a couple weekends ago, her phone was just blowing up and I was like, Mom, like, who are you talking to? Like, is it a group chat? Like, what's going on? Why is your phone blowing up? And she's like, oh, it's the ring. I don't know how to turn it off. And it's just like constant notification. And it's always negative because no one like, why would you, you know, post something positive? Because it's, you know,
Yeah.
neighbors looking out for each other.
Oh,
Right.
wow.
And so before that, she didn't really think about it. You know, she lives in a very, you know, a private neighborhood. It's mostly older folks. It's mostly like people who've lived there for years. You know, she's left her garage door open before. She's left her like trunk open before, and her neighbor would go and close it for her. You know, very nice neighborhood. But now she's like, oh, I don't know if my
Oh
neighborhood's really
dear.
that all that nice.
You know, it's crazy. Statistically, the world is way safer than it's ever been. It is safer to walk the streets. Generally speaking, I'm not talking about in a neighborhood where there's, you know, a lot of gang violence. I'm just talking about generally speaking, globally, the world is safer than it's ever been. But this fear level has gone through the roof, you know, because it sells. Fear sells. It's like sex sells, fear sells. And so they're just selling to it, you know. But it's up to us to be conscious and say, no, I'm not going to buy into that fear. I'm not going to buy that. I'm not going to consume that mainstream news. I'm not going to. I choose not to.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I think we need to, I talked about this in one of my other podcast episodes, but we kind of have to do a social media cleanse sometimes. You know, we have to see, you know, what feeds that we enjoy. Even like family members, I've had to mute them. So luckily there's there's ways to, you know, mute people without unfollowing them
Yeah.
and without them knowing, you know. So
Yeah.
I've had to do that with some people because they're just constantly posting negative things and triggering things, and you know, at some point it gets too much. And then that's all you're thinking about.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good for people to remember that they can actually have something to say about what's showing up in their feeds.
Yeah. And it does work. Like um I was interested in like making a bunch of, or I'm trying to cook more at home and not eat as much out. And now my feed is just like full of like different recipes and people cooking. So it works. If you're deliberate about what you choose to look at, you can change the algorithm, if you will, or whatever they call it.
Or you can use it to your advantage. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I know we've been talking for over an hour, so I want to be like cognizant of your time, but I do want to ask, because you are, you know, a conscious communication coach for the audience, like how can they start practicing open-mindedness in their day-to-day life?
One of my favorite, and it's favorite practice because it's so effective, is a practice of mindfulness meditation and also integrated mindfulness, which is quite simply an attention to the present moment. And it's a practice. It's a mind training. It's like going to the gym and pumping iron for the mind, you know, so sitting, and you can have a guided meditation. Oh, actually, if it's okay with you, I can offer your listeners a gift, and they can have my mindfulness meditation app that I recorded. They can have it for free. It's not an
Oh,
app, it's a
sure.
series. It's an introductory course, and it's online, and they can normally have to pay for it, but I'll give you a coupon code, and your listeners can download it for free. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
But so mindfulness meditation, I've been practicing it dedicated now for 9 years, and it really is a wonderful capability, because what you're doing when you practice mindfulness meditation or integrated mindfulness, so being mindful in a moment of doing something that you're ordinarily doing, so listening to someone or brushing your teeth or driving the car, whatever you're doing, you can do it mindfully. You are noticing without attaching. So what our identity does, who we think we are, we attach to our experiences. We attach to our emotions. I am angry, we say, or I am sad. We attach to our vehicles. You know, I am so-and-so's husband or wife, or I am an IT consultant, or I am a bus driver. We attach to this stuff. The practice of mindfulness is simply noticing without the attachment. So you are unattaching yourself from all of this temporal comings and goings of life, just to simply notice. So you can notice anything that shows up in your conscious awareness. You can notice your thoughts. You can notice the thoughts that are gripping onto an idea that you have of the way you think things should be. Right? So someone's talking to you and you've got a judgment on that, what they're saying, and you've already got your opinion, and you're like, no, that's bullshit. You don't know what you're talking about. You can notice that. You can notice yourself doing that. You can notice those thoughts, and you can teach yourself to remove yourself from being attached and identified with stuff. So as you get better at doing this, you can be in a moment of a conversation with someone, and you can elevate above your opinion and notice the opinion as just a bunch of thoughts. Then you can open to the other person without attaching to your judgment on what they're saying. It's a really exquisite and beautiful practice that we can get better at. So mindfulness meditation is one thing. Another thing to help your listeners, if they're interested in becoming more open-minded, is create a habit of pausing. Just pause. Before you say something, pause. In between tasks, pause. Just take a few breaths. Just pause for a few seconds. Take a few breaths and then continue. On your way to the car, you're walking to the car, pause, stand still. Smell the roses per se, right? Take a few breaths and then continue. This habit of pausing is creating little break states from our normally incessant stream. From the moment we wake up, there's this incessant internal dialogue and movement from task to task to thought throughout the day. We kind of get a cheap break from that when we switch on Netflix, or when we're playing sport, or when we engage ourselves in a way. But when you're not watching Netflix or playing sport, or lost in your art, just say you're playing an instrument or painting or something like that. But when you're just in your normal day-to-day routine, from brushing your teeth to getting dressed to getting in the car to going to work and so on, it's an unbroken, incessant trail of dialogue and action. We get lost in it. And that's closed-minded, because we're not creating a pause to consider there might be an alternative perspective. So creating pause moments throughout your day, I find really, really handy. And to create a habit, I link the new habit with an existing habit. So then you create a neural association. So for example, get a little Post-it note and stick it on the dashboard of your car that says pause. So you go to your car every morning to go to work, and you get in the car and you see the note and you go, pause before I turn the ignition on, right? What happens is that you create a neural association. After some time, you don't need the Post-it note. Every time you sit down in your car and you're about to turn your car on, you automatically pause, take a breath, and continue. So yeah, there are a couple of implementable strategies to help people with open-mindedness.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm definitely going to try to practice that pausing one, because I'm always, go, 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 which I think is normal for a lot of people. We don't always take that break. We're always thinking about the next thing we got to do, the next thing we got to check off our list. So definitely want to practice pausing.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's my favorite habit that I've created.
Awesome. All right. Well, is there any last minute topics, advice, anything you want to share before the end of the show? And also, maybe let the audience know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. You can find me at jemfuller.com, which is JEMFULLER.com. I'd love it if you watch my TEDx talk. Just go onto YouTube and search my name, and my TEDx talk will come up. That's all about communication. Be awesome if you bought my book. You can get it on Amazon or anywhere that you buy books. You can get my book. And yeah, go and grab my course. I'd love to give it to you for free. I'll share with you the coupon code, which is Spring Gift, 2 words together as one word, Spring Gift. And if your listeners pop that in, then they'll be able to download my course for free.
Perfect. Yeah, I'll add all of that stuff in the show notes. So if you're interested, go check the show notes, and Jem's website will be there with the coupon code.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me. That's been a really great conversation. Definitely one of my top favorites.
Oh, that's so lovely, Melissa. I'm sure you say that to everybody, but it has been a really lovely conversation. I've enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Thanks for making it to the end. If you enjoy what you hear and want to stay up to date on the show, please follow me on Facebook and or on Instagram. You can also check out my website at thetalkativeintrovertpodcast.com. All the information will be on there, as well as in the show notes. If you want to help support the show, please review and rate the podcast and share it with your friends and family. Thanks so much, and I'll talk to you guys in the next episode.